Okay, hopefully you're able to hear me okay as I do this video. Um, we all have this alert about the coronavirus situation. It looks like the school is going to be go online for a couple of weeks here, and I still have to get with the school here. I guess maybe tomorrow to find out what's going on too. And but I am used to doing online studies, and I have my own my home office set up to where I can do this video using OBS Studio. So I'm going to prepare a class for next week. I'll try to maybe get a couple of them done here. To give us some guidance, and hopefully this will work out. The first thing I did want to tell you though is if we look here, I noticed that in our courses, I'm just going to pick this first class here. It'll apply to all of you. The video, I'm not going to do but one video and just put it up for all of you, so just ignore the class itself. I noticed that I had made a mistake and put a pre-write worksheet for this class. I had it dated March 6th, I think it was, which was during spring break. Please forgive me. I don't want you guys to do any work during spring break. I certainly want you to enjoy your spring break. We all need a little vacation, and it'd be I have to grade papers, and I'm doing some work on my end, which is what I get paid to do. But you guys need to relax and enjoy your spring break. So I went back and changed that assignment date to next week, which would be next Wednesday, and I sent you out email on that. I changed the way the assignment read also. Remember, we are going to be starting now for our new essay. Some of you are going to be changing your topics as we talked about, and so you'll need to do a new pre-write worksheet. If you're not changing your topics, still do a pre-write worksheet, and what I'd like for you to do is I would like for you to at least try to refresh what you had done before. Hopefully this link will work for everybody when it comes up. It should work for everybody. Let's see here. It links to that way. Let me see if it does something here. Yep. Okay, so do a new pre-write worksheet. It'll help you to do your thesis anyway. Your topic may or may not be the same. Remember, you have the option now to change your topic because of the fact that argumentative, it was hard for some of you to get a argumentative paper around your discourse community. As I mentioned, I understand a little bit better as I think about it that a freshman class and even a sophomore class is not far enough into their discourse community to really know what kind of problems or issues where there might be an argument. You're most familiar with arguments that are in society, social arguments of some kind. So you can choose a topic. Look at the pros and cons website in choosing your topics, or just do a Google search on argumentative topics and pick one of those that interests you the most. The reason for an argumentation, and we're going to go over it again, is this is the idea of the argument essay is not supposed to be a persuasive essay, although you will be doing persuasion. But the general idea behind it is to help you do better on critical thinking, so that you'll know more about critical thinking, and for crafting arguments and learning to use those techniques when it comes to that. So, and secondly, it's because in an argumentative paper, it depends a lot on research. It should depend a lot on research because of the fact that you should be looking at other people that are subject matter experts on the subject that you have chosen. You're writing basically an opinion paper, but unless you've got a PhD and you're a subject matter expert in that particular topic yourself, you're not going to be doing primary research. You're going to be doing secondary research, is where you're drawing from the ideas and understanding from other people, and you are analyzing that and synchronizing that within your own paper. So here's a pre-write worksheet. I have it scheduled now due for the first Wednesday when you come back to class, which is next week. So work on getting that done. Answering the questions, refresh your questions that you attempt to answer, describing your audience, and a new working thesis for that. Okay, let's go to look at the next assignment that will be due. As I said, I'm making this video and I'm going to put it up on the web courses so that you can work online with it, and we'll see how it goes. I hadn't talked to the boss at school yet to see what their expectations are, but at least I've had some experience doing online studies. So I hope you don't mind my lecturing this way. You'll notice that I have my video here, and I actually have a green screen behind me using a chroma key. So this is some of the stuff that maybe you guys will learn to do along the way in using media. It's a lot of fun doing these things. On our assignments, you'll notice that you have a reading response that's due, number 5. I'm going to go over here to the modules where I have them more in order. We're down toward the 4th module here. We're ending the 3rd module. Reading response number 5. Let me remind you that when it comes to reading responses, what I'm looking for is that you actually quote something out of the book, and quote or paraphrase it in such a way that it is plainly related to the reading. But I'm also expecting you to cite it. You'll do an in-text citation, and I do want you to go ahead and do an Mla citation as a reference to give you practice on doing Mla. I prefer Mla over APA. Some of you are used to APA, but to be consistent, let's learn Mla at least for this class. So you can get online or look at your Mla, your Easy Writer handbook, and it'll show you how to do an Mla citation. But practice writing the reference as well as doing the in-text citation for whatever reading you're quoting from the book. Again, by doing the quoting, I'm able to see that you're making a direct response to what was written. You're going to be reading a chapter from Nancy Somers, Revision Strategies of Student Writers and Experienced Adult Writers. And what that section of your book is all about when it comes to revision is that students tend to revise differently than professional writers revise. Everything that you write when it comes gets revised unless you're just real sloppy, which typically even the best writers, that if you don't go through the process of doing a whole draft but even if you're writing an email, chances are you're going to have to revise it unless you're extremely good. We do need to proofread everything we do. Even if you use all the proofreaders and spell checks and everything like that in a document, and you go through the spell check and grammar checks, you should still proofread, because spell checks don't pick up errors when you use the wrong word. For example, you have the word to and the word to and the word to. T-O, T-O-O, and T-W-O. Well, if you use TO instead of TOO, your spell checker is going to be right. Is not going to pick it up as a incorrect word, and your grammar checker may or may not pick it up. This is where proofreading comes in. But typically, especially with essays and long documents, you're going to revise them. You'll do a draft. And the draft is, of course, where you're trying to get all your thoughts and your organization and your content down. And for many students, as you'll find from Nancy Summers in that article, many students, they're strictly focused on word choice when it comes to revision. Did they get the right word? Did they get the right spelling? Did they get the right punctuation? They focus on grammar and mechanics more than anything else. Professional writers don't just focus on that. Professional writers want to know if they got the right organization. Did they get the right content? Did what they write give the right kind of meaning and those kinds of things? So they're looking at the writing from a different viewpoint. And so when you're reading reading about revision, you'll see that there is a difference between how students revise papers and how experienced writers revise papers. So that'll be your reading response. And be sure, again, to quote something directly out of the book and cite it. Use a, I'm beginning to mark off on reading responses. You've already probably seen me catch some of them. But I'm marking off if there's not a citation. So the citation is required to give you some practice on citing, both in-text citation and references. Let's talk about, again, something that you're going to get, I'm sure you're probably getting a little warned about, and that is the difference between an argumentation and a persuasion. We went over this in class, but I kind of went through it quickly. Sometimes we get a little bit restless, and I have a sneaking suspicion. I know how students are. You may or you may not watch this whole video. You might just skim through it and make it go fast, and that might be the case. But you might miss something if you do that. But nevertheless, the important thing is at least to try to get the meat of what we're talking about here and help it to improve your writing. As I had mentioned before in class, some of us wrote persuasive papers and not argumentative papers. You don't have an argument if you don't have something that's debatable. And as I said, being new in your discourse community, you may not know what arguments actually exist. But all of us knows that there's a lot of social arguments out there, things that are prevalent in society, whether it's gun control or abortion or marriage or minimum wage. Should we increase minimum wage, or even should we have medical marijuana? There's all kinds of things that we've discussed. And as I said, we're going to be discussing some of these in class as well. When in this particular section of your class, you're all going to be bringing in a pro article and a con article pertaining to your topic of choice. Whatever your major essay thesis is going to be, I want you to bring in 2 articles, 1 pro and 1 con, and we're going to actually debate them in class. We're going to debate everybody's essay. And as the reason why we do that, as I said, is that even as students, we are all stakeholders in one another's writing. If you're in the medical discourse community and you're writing a paper that has to do with an issue dealing with medicine, then certainly it can impact my life. It's going to impact the medical community, hopefully. That's the whole purpose of writing something. Is it going to get something done? Is it going to get something changed? Is it going to be of value? As I mentioned before, writing is not about getting a good grade. Writing is not about trying to persuade your professor one way or the other about any particular issue. If you have a good argument, you might. It's always a possibility. But you need to look at your writing, especially as argumentative essays, is what do I want done? What do I want to see changed? And think of it as the big outside chance that maybe you'll change the world. You never know. All of your writing becomes a part of history if it's kept, as I said before. If it's kept and finds its way into print, especially, it becomes a part of culture. It's a cultural document that can affect the way histories go. So writing is very important in that way. But looking at an argument compared to persuasion, number one, if it's not debatable, it's not an argument. And the way you decide whether something is debatable or the way you craft your argument is with your thesis. And the thesis has a purpose for it. It's not only to help people understand the side that you're on or what your opinion is, but it also becomes the guiding sentence or the guiding topic for your whole paper. It's the core of your paper. All your topic sentences throughout your paper should have something to do with that thesis. Let's look at a thesis. Again, this is old hat. We've already covered it in this class, and we'll cover it again, but maybe there'll be a few extra things in here that you might not have caught before. Number one, in an argument, it is a claim, not a fact, that can be supported by a reason or reasons. So your opinion or your claim, you're basically saying to your audience, this is what I intend to prove. Now, you don't write in there, this is what I intend to prove, or, I'm going to argue this case. That statement will be very distracting from the topic and for your paper. You don't want to distract your audience, but you want your audience to get a clear understanding of what your opinion is. When it says it's a claim, not a fact, you don't argue facts, or you can. I know that people do sometimes argue facts. Primarily, they're arguing about whether the fact is a fact or not. But a fact that is indeed a fact is not something that can be argued. It's something that exists as it is. But your claim is your opinion, and what the facts do is support your claim. It supports your thesis. So it directly answers the question of the assignment. The assignment in this case is that you have to have a debatable issue, and your thesis lets me know and let your readers know that this is what your paper is all about. It's a statement that unifies the paper by stating the writer's most important or significant point regarding the topic. As I mentioned before, topics are broad. They're broad statements, and there are many ways to look at specific topics. What a thesis is just one issue among many concerning that overall broad issue. If we think, for example, on the issue of gun control, that's a big topic. But how do we look at that? We can look at it from the standpoint of how does the criminal think about it? The criminal even has an opinion on gun control. Did you know that? I'm sure you probably did. They're probably not for it and are going to ignore it anyway. But most criminals would even agree that, if you're going to be a criminal, gun control is not going to make much difference if you want to get a gun. So I suppose that's true. But you can argue gun control from the standpoint of how does a hunter look at it? Or you can argue gun control from the standpoint of mental illness. You can argue gun control from the standpoint of should teachers be armed. There's a lot of different ways, and a lot of those issues are actually on the table right now when it comes to gun control. As I mentioned before, there are different ways and different opinions of looking at it, but you also have the issue where people will have different experiences with the issue of gun control. For example, in my own experience, I had a guy break into my house one time, and it's a good thing I had a gun because this guy broke into my house and he was going to rape my wife, but I happened to be there. That was the dumbest thing I ever saw in my life. As a guy tried to break in and rape my wife, and I came around and got my gun out of the closet and chased him out the door. So I have a different view, perhaps. Now I still I have no problem with realistic gun measures and gun laws. I might have a problem with trying to take my gun away, and I'm sure a lot of other people feel exactly the same way. So you can debate on a lot of different ways on gun control. But your thesis will unify your paper around the significant point that you have regarding that topic. It's usually one sentence that does not discuss many topics. It is supposed to be about one topic. Your essay is supposed to be about one topic, and as we've said before, every paragraph is supposed to have a topic sentence that's supposed to have one topic in the paragraph. Every paragraph topic is supposed to point back to your thesis, but this is where you get unity, where all your paper is unified around one topic. Now, in a large essay, obviously, you're going to have more than one argument available to you about that one topic, and in a large essay, you may write that kind of an essay to where you are covering several different arguments. But if you can't get one argument down good, you're not going to do very well trying to confuse everything by trying to cover the whole book. If you're not writing a book, you're writing an essay. It forecasts the content and order of the essay, and you'll notice that your thesis sentence is usually placed at the beginning of the essay, preferably toward the end of the introduction, but at least within the first or second paragraph. So I've seen in some of your essays, and I've seen some really good essays in all three of these classes that I teach. We got some real quality writing among you students. Really proud of that. So, and some of them I've seen the thesis sentence in the first paragraph and some in the second paragraph. But one reason why it's usually placed toward the bottom of that paragraph is because the thesis itself also generally serves as a transition sentence that goes into your to the body of the paper. So this is the normal placement of that in the first or second paragraph toward the end of the paragraph. Developing your thesis. Here's the most effective thesis statements. Here's what it says. Number one, what is the essay subject? Is it gun control? Is it abortion? Is it marriage? Is it minimum wage? Is it legalizing marijuana? Is it climate change? In this little example here, it's sports. Man, I didn't know there was any argument over sports. Yeah, there's a whole lot of arguments over sports. Nothing else. There's arguments over who's the best team. But this gives a little example, and believe it or not, you have to use a lot of facts. That's why they keep so many statistics when it comes to sports. It's amazing. But here they're using an example of a what makes a essay or thesis, and how that's crafted. The first sentence, it shows playing sports is really good for people. Well, how is it good for people? How does it benefit people? Why is it good for people? You see all the questions there. Which people benefit from playing sports? These are journalistic questions. We've covered those before. The why, when, where, how, who, and those kinds of things. So the questions that are used when you're thinking about a particular subject. So those are the questions that are being asked. The next part of it, the next example is They asked, they answered the question, which people benefit from playing sports? In this case, it says playing sports is really good for children. Well, you still have the journalistic questions. Why is it good for children? How is it good for children? So you're still crafting your thesis. You're bringing it to more points. You notice this. Maybe I think that playing sports helps children develop better cooperation skills, better coordination, better overall health. And those are reasons for that you're going to argue. But if you just say playing sports is really good for children and you don't include any of this particular information, your thesis is not going to be clear. So you want a clear opinion of what you're going to write on, and then you're going to provide all the examples and all the facts and all the research and answer all the questions about why is playing sports beneficial for children, but more why sports, it tells you in your thesis what it is that you're going to argue. Cooperation skills, better coordination, better overall health. Of course, the question then becomes, who's going to argue with those? So, how are you going to get an argumentative paper out of that? Is there anybody that's going to argue against that particular subject? Well, maybe so. There probably are people that think that it's not really, it doesn't really have as much value. So you notice the elements of a thesis statement. You have your subject, and you have your main idea, and then you have your opinions. Now, as we go down a little bit farther, you'll notice what a thesis is not. I have seen in a few papers the statement made, I'm going to tell you why, or I'm going to tell you about, I'm going to write on. Those are not thesis statements. Those are announcements. An example here, I'm going to tell you the importance of ABC. Well, that announces what you're going to write about, but that doesn't tell me what you're going to write about. How's important? Again, that's not a clear thesis. That's an announcement. Notice this one. A thesis is not introduced by an opinion phrase such as I think, I feel, or I believe. Now, we did see in some of the material that we talked about that there is an opinion by some writing professors that there is a time to use the phrases I think, I feel, and I believe when you're trying to show that some pathos, and emotion in your writing. However, for the most part, those statements by themselves tend to be pretty weak, but that's not the way the thesis should actually be worded. They shouldn't be a part of your thesis statement. You might use them at places inside your document, but your thesis statements, in order to really catch somebody's attention, needs to be good and strong. So you don't introduce your opinion with those weak statements. Find something that's really strong. Example here says, I feel that good hygiene begins with the basics of effective hand washing. You actually don't even have to use the word I feel. Notice what it says. Just simply write, good hygiene begins with the basics of effective hand washing. That's much stronger. It's a very declarative statement. And so in one sense of the word, it can't be really considered a fact. It probably could be considered a fact in some ways, but you're going to support the idea because by itself, it doesn't give you all the reasons why good hygiene begins with effective hand washing. So there's much more to it. A thesis is not a statement of fact. A thesis is not a question. Now, I think I've raised this in class that there are times when you can use a question as a thesis statement. That's usually when you use what's called a rhetorical question. That is one where an answer is not expected. The question is asked, but it's only asked from the standpoint of something that you already have an answer for, and people know that you have an answer for it. So you're not expecting to get an answer. But generally speaking, you would not use a question, especially like the example that's given here. What makes a photograph so significant? That's not a thesis statement. That's a question. So you're not stating your opinion or your position on your topic. You're just asking the question, so it can't be a thesis. Let's go back. Let's see. Okay. All right. So, since your thesis must be something that's debatable, here's things that you have to consider. How many people could argue against my position? I guarantee you that no matter what you have an opinion on, there's probably at least somebody or some few people that have an opposite opinion, because there are some people that we call in the psychiatric world just plain oppositional. They're opposing to anything and everything. And of course, that's getting into a different subject here. But in reality, when you're looking for a good argument to argue, it should be one where you have a general sense that there are plenty of people, or that there are people that have a different opinion. And what's the purpose of the argument? The purpose of the argument, as I said, is to get something done, generally by changing somebody else's mind. You want to have people do something. You want in order for them to get to do what you want them to do. If there's somebody that opposes your opinion, you're going to have to make some changes and get them to change their mind and get on board with you. So to be a good argument essay, you have to have people that are against your position. So when you have to put yourself in their position, and you have to ask yourself, what would they say? What do people say about climate change? Some people may say that it's caused by human man-made error or man-made conditions. So that's one very big part of the argument of climate change. Other people may say that climate change is something that's cyclical. It's just a regular force of nature at work, and that's another argument. But then, of course, what you're looking for is, what do the experts have to say? There are people who have studied it and who've researched it, and you're going to be researching it yourself. So what you're looking for is something that's research that is credible. Pardon me. I don't think I'll edit that out. Just got a little cough here. So how are people going to argue the position? Can it be addressed with a yes or no? If it's just simply a yes or no and takes care of it, it's not worth the debate. Simply because it doesn't have any real purpose for developing a debate like that. You're wanting to have, if it's a yes or no, that's not, that's very limiting when it comes to the issue. So you want to be able to research something where there's a lot of information. You'll notice, for example, in your first essay, you looked at one scholarly article and the research by one person that either supported or opposed your opinion, but that was just that one person or that one article that you were looking at, and you had some information. But a lot of your arguments require a lot more facts. If you're going to go to a broader audience or to the broad audience, you've got to realize a lot of people will have different views, and some people are going to read it skeptically. And your skeptical people, you're going to need more facts for them. Some people will read it not so skeptically and be accepting of it, and you may not have to worry about the fact that you have to have lots of facts for them. They're willing to take just a little bit of fact. So there are differences. You're talking about a broader audience, but you need to be sure that you have enough information in your paper to really be persuasive. You do want to persuade in an argumentative paper, but the main thing here is not about whether you're just persuading, but that you're dealing with an actual issue where there's opposing viewpoints that requires you to research and requires you to support your evidence. Can I base my argument on scholarly evidence, or am I relying on religion, cultural standards, and morality? You must be able to do quality research. There are some subjects that are almost purely religious, and research is not going to change that. It's strictly going to be a religious matter of opinion, and it's not, you can't research necessarily all the items that might be involved in faith, because faith is a very strong thing that's not going to change. And it's the same thing with groupthink. If you rely on groupthink instead of research, you're not going to be doing a good job on getting rid of bias, and you're not going to be a good job on proving your points. You're not going to do a good job of actually supporting evidence that can support your particular opinion. But also, when it talks about religion, but it also talks about cultural standards, and that's one of the difficulties that we have is that many social issues become cultural issues, and when you have competing cultures, it's very hard for competing cultures to coexist. Usually what happens, trying to get two different cultures to coexist with one another, what will generally happen is you'll end up having a third culture. So that's those are things that are really hard sometimes to research. You need good, solid facts that can support your point, and a lot of arguments are just not the kinds of things that you can argue over. So when I think of the arguments about creation versus evolution, well, one thing I do know for a fact, nobody living today was living back then. So it's kind of hard to establish a lot of facts other than through opinion on some of those things. There's some scientific research that comes into the mix, but you can only go so far with that. How have I made my argument specific enough? You can't afford to beat around the bush. You have to have good, solid facts, and that requires good, solid research. Here's an interesting point. Are you worried about taking a firm stance on an issue? The other day in class, we jumped overboard, didn't we? We took a big risk when we were just discussing the issue of abortion. And that's a very sensitive, tough topic. I chose to do that in class a little bit, but as you notice, prepped you first ahead of time. There are some subjects where people go to fistfights over it, and the emotion is so strong And as I was pointing out, and all I wanted to point out there in class and try to do, was we were not going to argue the debate of abortion. What we were going to deal with is the emotion behind it, and can we actually discuss a subject without going to blows? And how do we check our emotions when we're dealing with something, and can we carry on conversations and discourse? As I mentioned in the discussion that we had in abortion, that people have different experiences, and you have to take into consideration how other people's experience will certainly affect the way they think about a particular subject. So, but is a little scary because, walking on eggshells when you get on some social issues like that, especially in a university setting where you have such a diversity between liberal or conservative, or and people can be outnumbered one way or the other. In any case, you have a great deal of diversity. You have a lot of women in some classes, and they're going to think one way, and then some, like I pointed out, in some of our classes, one of our classes, we have more guys than girls. So that changes the dynamic of how you might debate an issue or discuss an issue. But emotion can be very, very important, and sometimes we're afraid to address an issue. We need to not be afraid, but of course we always have to be in have the mindset and an agreement between people when they're going to debate issues or discuss issues. There has to be an agreement between them that of how do we keep our emotions in check, and how we just want to focus on the facts. Let's focus on the facts, and there are things that you don't do in debating, and there's things that you don't do in writing. You don't turn around and start blaming people and accusing people and saying evil about somebody that has a different opinion. You're not only not going to change anybody's mind, you're going to, people will just simply turn you off or throw the paper into the trash can. So we need to be willing, though, to address tough issues, and that's one of the difficulties that we live in a very divided society. Many times we're not really willing to listen to others. What was that thing that I first mentioned when we first started our first class? Is the rule number one in class came from that Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Successful People. Think first, seek first to understand before you seek to be understood. And that's an important principle to live by. Here's some things you do and don't do when you're writing an argument paper. You do want to use passionate language, and like I said, there's here says don't use weak qualifiers like I believe, I feel, or I think. We saw that there was some people would actually disagree, but don't misunderstand what when people say, there are times for I believe, I feel, or I think, because there are times when you want some pathos, and those are some words that can contribute to that, but it depends on how you use them. But in a real persuasive paper, you normally, where you're really going to use a lot of persuasion, and in an argumentative paper especially, those become really weak when it comes to your argument. So it's better just to leave them out. Do cite experts who agree with you. Don't claim to be an expert if you're not one. It's kind of sad to say. I've kind of read a little bit on climate change, and you got PhDs on both sides. They both claim to be experts. So there are probably some subjects where it's hard to tell, because you say, well, I'm going to bring in my expert, and I'm going to bring in my expert. It's just like in a court of law. You have experts that disagree on things. However, what this is saying is you don't claim to be an expert. because in order to be an expert, you've got to be somebody that's either done primary research, and that takes a lot of time, and that has to be vetted to do that sort of thing, and or you have to have a lot of study and a lot of education and a lot of qualifications that say that you can be a subject matter expert. And we're not that. We're doing secondary research where we're going to be depending on other people who are experts, and they can agree with us or not agree with us, but we're gonna try to find people that support our point of view, and the experts that support our point of view. Your opponents are going to try to do the same thing. You just got to do a better job. Do provide facts, evidence, and statistics to support your position. And don't use strictly moral or religious claims to support your argument. As I said, there's a lot of things that are opinion, and the moral and religious claims are, you can't really argue against religion per se, because it is faith-based, and it's not always based on evidence that can support anything. Now there are, there are exceptions with that, but in general, those are not the kinds of things that will help you when it comes to your arguments. So when you're talking about research, if you're researching the argument about some issue that's a moral issue, try to find facts and examples that are scholarly and that have been garnered by research and not just garnered by opinion. That's why you avoid certain kinds of websites when you're doing your research. You're not going to go to opinion websites. You want to go to things that end with an edu or an org that's a reliable organization, professional organization, or you're going to use your library. But facts, evidence, and statistics. There's a reason why we talk about scientific research. Provide reasons to support your claim. Don't assume the audience will agree with you about any aspect of your argument. Again, persuasion is an essential part of an argumentative paper, and that's true. You have to, but the persuasion comes from the facts, and the persuasion comes from how you support your argument with the claims. It doesn't come from the fact that you just claim something, or that you may have the very best worded, logical, rational conclusion, but that's not going to change anybody's mind that would oppose you. People are going to want to see evidence. Do address the opposing side argument and refute their claim. And of course, as we mentioned in the model for this second essay, we're going to go back over it again when we take a look at that. I'm expecting to use the 5 parts of an essay that include the introduction and includes your arguments and your refutation and your conclusion, and those things. So we'll look at those that 5-part essay again. But you're going to have to look at your opposing side, and you're going to have to refute their claims. But you're going to want to stick with things that pertain to your thesis. Don't go down any rabbit trails trying to prove something that wasn't a part of your thesis. Okay. And here's the important part. To address the other side of the argument you plan to make, you need to put yourself in their shoes. Jot down several good reasons why you support that particular side of the argument. Remember, it is true that your culture, your values, and your beliefs may influence how you think, and that's true. But that's by themselves, they're not going to influence the argument to change people. The idea of the argument the whole purpose of it is you want to get something done. You want to make a change of some kind, and you want to get people that oppose you to make changes. They're only going to do that not strictly based on how much logic you use, but on the evidence behind your opinions and the evidence behind your logical conclusions. And that's where you're going to end up with a call to action. But how can you provide all that unless you give them the evidence first? So, but you have to understand the other side. How are they supporting their argument? You have to look at what they're using for support as well. Look at the reasons you provided and try to argue with yourself. Ask, why would someone disagree with each of these points? And that's why I pointed out in some of the little memos when I did with the SO, where's the argument? What's the argument about? Tell me. There's no argument in that. I agree with you. Everybody agrees with that statement. Well, that's not a good argument. So why would somebody disagree with me? What would their response be? When you're dealing with the issues of gun control, like I said before, even criminals have an idea about gun control. If they're going to argue against gun control, you got to kind of figure out they got an agenda, don't you? So other people are going to have agendas also, and you need to kind of find out what those agendas might be. Think carefully about your audience. Try to understand their background. Who are you talking to? And why are you talking to that particular group of people? Is it a very diverse group? So again, this page is up for you to look at as you review it and all those kinds of things. We're getting ready to go into start working on our bigger essay now. I'm hoping that this video kind of comes in handy. I noticed it's about 51 minutes long. I did pretty good, I think. So I hope it's useful and all. While we're getting through this virus closed down and all those kind of things, keep up with your work. Don't fall behind. Send me email if you need to. Call me if you need to. I'm available. Whatever it is that you need, I'm certainly here for you. I think you're all great students. Again, I'm going to put this on all 3 of my courses, even though I'm only filming it with using one of them here. So we'll certainly stay close in touch here during this 2 weeks or whatever it takes before we get back into our classroom. In the meantime, you stay safe, wash your hands, and do your work, and don't fall behind.